Hey, how's everyone out there doing? This is Amy Hamilton, author of The Consummate Communicator, Character Traits of True Professionals, and the project manager of Life is a Project. I am so honored today. I am here with Admiral James Stavridis, retired U.S. Navy. I served under Admiral James Stavridis when I was at the U.S. European Command as a government civilian. And when I worked for him, I was just so moved by his character traits of true professionals. And not only the actual character traits themselves, but how he communicated this to us as a team. And he didn't just use one type of communications, it was multiple ways of communicating. And I was so inspired that I decided to write a leadership fable based on the character traits of true professionals with Admiral James Stavridis, and I almost gave away his name in the book, of Jay Admiral. And so, Admiral Stavridis, would you share with us, how did you develop the character traits of true professionals?
Well, Amy, first of all, thank you for having me on, and thank you for your service as a government worker really around the world. And I know you've presented on leadership and thought about it deeply and presented in over 20 countries. So it's a real honor to be with you. I think all of us would like to imagine ourselves as people of character, right? And that's kind of as far as a lot of people get. My theory of the case is to really take yourself on this voyage of character in life, you have to think kind of specifically about some aspects of character that matter to you. So let me sketch out 6 of them that occurred to me over the course of my life and career, and upon which I'm still working every single day. So top of my list is civility. It's the idea that we ought to be kind to one another. We shouldn't lose our temper. We shouldn't demean others. And I came on that, Amy, kind of through a negative experience. When I was a young ensign on my first ship, I had a captain who was, in Navy parlance at the time, a screamer. Every time something went wrong, he blew up, yelled at us, demeaned us, called us names. It's just not a very good way to run an organization. Leaving aside all of the compassionate kind of qualities that we hope we have, it's just inefficient. People lose their place when they get yelled at. Their mind goes white, things break down. So out of that experience, as a very young officer in my very early 20s, I developed this idea that a real professional is someone who doesn't lose their temper, doesn't scream, doesn't yell, has real civility toward others. You know, the second one is what I call quiet confidence. And I learned that even earlier as a midshipman at the Naval Academy, where, to be honest with you, I started to feel fairly overconfident in my view. I was doing well at the academy. I was getting really good grades. I was on a couple of varsity sports teams. I was the editor of the magazine of the school, the Log magazine, and I started to really take myself a little too seriously. I was overconfident, and I was always kind of trying to toot my own horn and tell people about how well I was doing. Well, I'll tell you what changed that. It was my classmates at the Naval Academy, my peers, who kind of took me aside and said, you know, Jim, you're a great guy and you're doing really well, but give it a rest, will you? And, you know, that stuck with me the rest of my life, that we're better served not by telling everyone how great we are, but rather by having that kind of quiet confidence, doing your job, doing it well. Others will notice over time. Third quality that I think is essential for any real professional, and that's creativity. Creativity. So often we get in our jobs, and I don't want to say we get in a rut, but we begin to just get maybe a little too comfortable, kind of doing the same thing day after day. We master it. It becomes second nature to us. I like that theory of the case that says, what can I do to shake things up today? And I came to that one kind of late in my career, to be honest with you, when I was a 1-star admiral right after 9/11. And I'd say from 1976, when I was commissioned, until till 9/11, so 25 years, I was pretty comfortable just doing the right things and kind of moving my career along. Then 9/11 happened. And it was quite clear to me, to everyone, that we had to change what we were doing. We had to bring a more creative approach to what, at that time, the Navy could contribute to what was then called the global war on terrorism. So I was put in charge of a small group of officers called Deep Blue, which was effectively a creativity think tank reporting directly to the Chief of Naval Operations. And our job was to come up with new ideas for how the Navy and Marine Corps team could contribute to this new kind of warfare that we were embarking upon. So creativity, again, I didn't kind of stumble into its importance until I was a one-star officer. But for the rest of my career, in my time at Deep Blue, my time as a strike group commander, my time coming back to the building as a 3-star and being the senior military assistant to the Secretary of Defense, Don Rumsfeld, and certainly during my years as a combatant commander, both at Southern Command and at U.S. European Command, where you and I worked together, I tried to create, I say that as a small pun, create an atmosphere of creativity to try and encourage innovation. And I think that is something, again, I came on relatively late, but I'm passionate about. And even as I've gotten out of the military and became the dean at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts, and in my current work in the world of private equity at the Carlyle Group, I've sought to continue that idea of creativity. One other attribute, crucial, and I think this is one that kind of everybody would agree on, and that is the idea of teamwork, of collaboration, of people coming together and pulling together. And the first time I really experienced the power of that quality was when I was in my late 20s and early 30s. I was a department head on a cruiser, the USS Valley Forge. It was a brand new Aegis cruiser. We had a terrific kind of hand-picked crew. But my department, I was a department head in charge of the operations department. I had about 120 people working for me. Very talented, but they were pulling in so many different directions. And I had the radiomen and the IT people like you used to be, Amy. I had the deck division, the people that go out with hammers and knock rust off. Couldn't be two more different missions. I had the Combat Information Center operators, the so-called operations specialists, had the navigation team on the bridge. It was a lot of people pulling in lots of different directions. And I had a great master chief who kind of took me under his wing. I was a very junior lieutenant commander in the Navy in 2004, and really showed me how to get all those different people who were doing different jobs, but get them pulling together for the operations department. And it really is true that the sum is always greater than simply the addition of the parts in any
Something
equation.
so many people forget.
That's so true. And then, the last two qualities that I think are really fundamental are very simple. One is honesty, and the other is determination. So honesty was just built into me by my parents. I, like a lot of young children, would stray occasionally, and my father was a Marine. I was in a Marine Corps household. We really kind of towed the straight and narrow. And I learned early on, don't lie, cheat, or steal. That's the honor code at the Naval Academy. I've tried to live that. I've failed, like we all do from time to time, but I've tried to live that. And I think honesty is a fundamental part of character. And then lastly, in your wonderful book, you kind of bring this up as a sixth character quality, and it's determination, it's resilience, the ability to take a punch and keep on coming. And again in life, I'm Greek American, so I'm going to use a Greek mythology here. It's like Sisyphus. He's the character who's always rolling the boulder up the mountain, but the gods have decreed that eventually the boulder rolls back down, and he has to put his shoulder again behind the boulder and move it up the mountain. You know, in our lives, that boulder rolls down a lot, but we have to be careful that we have the resilience, the determination to never quit, put our shoulder behind it and move on. So there are 6 character traits. I think you do a wonderful job in the book of outlining them, and thanks for spending time with me to discuss them.
No, I think that it's so important. And what really resonated with me was all these different traits, when you put them together, just created such an amazing work environment.
Mm.
And one of the reasons why I took the book and I made it a leadership fable and I took it out of the military is I feel that it transcends the military, every single trait. And I admit I was working for an Army 06 at the time directly when I was over there working for you. And he put it in very interesting Army vernacular on civility. And he said, well, would you just go and curse out the Starbucks, waitress, if she messed up your order? Why would you do this to your coworkers? And it just always stayed with me how, whether it's at home or even at work, it really transcends, because we tend to be on our worst possible selves in front of those who are closest to us. And often that's our coworkers. And it just really kind of stayed with me, is like, be civil, and every other point you brought up, just really important things. And I'll tell you, writing a book, as you know, I reached out to you a few years ago, and it took a whole journey. And what was really interesting is Google and Facebook rule our lives, and sent me some pictures saying, oh, last year this time you were in Westcliff, Colorado. One of our viewers, Michelle Moraz, I was staying out at her cabin, which used to be my cabin. And I was writing the book. And so it took an entire year from really going from the point where the book was finished to the editing and the publishing process, which, as an accomplished author, is a huge process. It takes determination.
It does. And first of all, again, I want to congratulate you on the book, which, as you say, is not a military book at all. It's not even a government book. It's a private sector leadership fable about a character who takes over a job in banking. And I love the format of it and the way you weave these character traits into a story that's very applicable in the world of business. So well done. And must have been a good time up in the cabin when you were writing it.
It was. And I do want to give a shout out to my sister, Barbara Madison. She worked in the banking industry for many years, and I kept consulting her, and she was giving me all these terms. And what I found out is the term teller is not actually a term that they use in banking anymore. And I was like, really? And so she's like, yeah, you should write that he's trying to correct this, antiquated, language. And I was like, something else to add. So like you said, it's that teamwork, that collaboration. Yeah. One of the things that just so impressed me at USUCOM is you had so many streams of communication. Like, you recognize some people, we had these little cards we carried around, there was placards on the wall, but then you went really extreme back at the time. And people have to remember, this was a decade ago. And Facebook, Twitter, it was not what it is now. Yeah. And you were out there, print media, you were out there, social media. And how do you effectively communicate these different character traits to people who work for you and on your staff? And what's your advice to other leaders?
Yeah, it's the old 3 words, right? Thought, word, and deed. So I think you have to begin as a leader. You kind of go from the inside out, right? You have to begin by thinking deeply about these. And whether the 6 characteristics you and I are talking about are the precise ones for you and your organization, or whether there are other ones that are equally or more important, that's up to you as a leader. So you got to begin with that hard process of thinking this through. Once you have sketched all that out, thought, word, and deed, then you have to put words to it. And I think that's different than just coming up with a basic set of characteristics. You have to, like you have done in the book, for example, do actual examples, little scenarios, stories, You have to come up with the right words. You'll recall our motto at U.S. European Command, which we generated by asking all of the 100,000 plus people who worked in EUCOM to contribute to. We had a whole process and winnowed it down to 10 and then went out and voted on it. That motto was stronger together. Stronger together remains the motto today. And it's back to that collaboration. But the point is, you have to think through what are the exact words that are going to tell the story of your thoughts. And then deed, thought, word, and deed. Deed is your own deeds, your own example, walking around the command, appearing in front of them, being on Facebook, being on Twitter. And you're right, Amy, those things are very commonplace today, and I'm glad they are. But back in 2009 to 2013, they weren't at all. And I had many of my contemporaries, other 4-stars, and senior civilian leaders who said, "What are you doing on Facebook? You know, that's not where admirals are supposed to find themselves." Well,
and as IT security people, we were not at all comfortable.
Exactly. This was a big deal. And in fact, however, if you go to one of my books, The Accidental Admiral, about those years, my memoir of those years, you'll find that I'm very proud of the fact that I will always go down in military history as the first person to tweet the end of a war. So I tweeted the end of the war in Libya, the 6-month conflict that NATO conducted there. And it ended with a tweet, first time in history. Someone's got to be the first one to do it. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm proud that I've been engaged in these social media. And they're not perfect. A lot of mistakes happen. Bad things happen on social media. We need to continue to find the balance between what's real and what's false on these social networks. But thought, word, and deed, as a leader, you got to be in that world. You got to show it with personal example. You got to communicate with the right words, from things as little as a card that people carry around to as simple as a placard on the wall to as scaled up as using the social media. You got to do all three.
I have to say, one of the things that fascinated me is how people really resonate towards you and the different ways that you've communicated. When I told a couple of my old coworkers, and I asked them to be some beta readers for the book, and I said, "Hey, can you help me with this?" And one of my coworkers, Bob Watson, came back and he said, "Amy, you have to do the scene in the boxing ring." And I was like, and so for the audience, Admiral Stavridis would come to the U.S. European Command, to the headquarters, and he would have us set up a boxing ring, and this is where he would present. And it was just so engaging. I just remember one time he was talking about staffing and taskers and making sure that we get it right before he goes to the joint staff. And it's the only time I've ever heard staffing done like a pep rally where we were like, "Yeah, we're the best staffers ever." And I was like, how do I convey this in a book? And how would this banker ever end up in this situation? So back to your creativity, it took a whole, and teamwork and collaboration. It took 3 people to come up with that concept of having the water main break and having to do this last minute venue. But you did use really intriguing things. And I know that as a commander, before you came to U.S. European Command, you were also noted for doing this on your ships. What's your advice for communicating to diverse groups? Right now, it's COVID, it's the pandemic, and we can't communicate face-to-face, really. Getting a bunch of people in a big room is a very scary thing right now. And so you seem to have really mastered this. What's your advice to leaders out there today and how they can communicate to people when they can't physically be with them?
Take advantage of technology. It's really that simple. And as we were talking about a moment ago, Amy, look what you're doing right now, streaming live on Facebook. You'll then record this. You are recording this. You'll pull clips out of it. You'll use them in short packages for Twitter. You'll probably pull some stills out and put it on Instagram. You might take a short clip and do a TikTok. I mean, there's so many different media out there. I just think back, 30 years ago when a tweet was something a bird did and the cloud was really a cloud in the sky. How did people communicate? It was much harder. And you did the kind of paper things we talked about, little cards, photographs, every day, Xeroxing or mimeographing note of the day. You used what technology you had and what was applicable at the time. And you got to keep moving and stay on the edge of it. So for every leader, especially in a time of COVID, use all these technologies. But here's a really important point, Amy. Personal contact still trumps everything. There is nothing as important for a leader as going retail, going into small groups, spending time around people. And once we get through COVID, the bottom line is you got to do both. You have to be able to do the big, scaled up media movement kinds of things, but you got to go retail. You got to go one-on-one at times, or at least if you're leading a big organization, go and talk to 20 or 30 people. On my ships, for example, even on an aircraft carrier, I would go down and talk to what are called work centers. These are groups of maybe 5 to 15 people that have responsibility for a given space or a given system on a ship. You got to go retail, but you also got to move it at scale. And thank God for technology that permits you to do the big scaled up things. When we get out of COVID, I think you're going to find a lot of leaders want to get back to the retail aspect, because both are very rewarding for leaders and both are necessary.
You bring up some great points there, and I'm actually working on my dissertation right now on virtual leadership and the transference from physical to virtual space for the pandemic. And one of the references I have was talking about how virtual leadership, goes back, through history. They used to send horses with runners, and this is the decree from the emperor. And, we have so many more advantages now. And, I will say I was disappointed. I had in my head, okay, I'm going to put this book out, and then I'm going to convince Admiral Stavridis that we're going to do this big launch in an auditorium. And then you picture you're going to, sign the book afterwards and, do this with all these people. And I've really had to shift the model a lot. And so many different people have. And one of the things I've been doing is a series called 24 Authors in 12 Hours. And it's a marathon session once a month where I just interview different authors. And it's really an authors helping authors kind of event. And I just wanted to give a plug to all the authors who've been out there and the ones I have scheduled for January and February. I took this month off for the holidays, but it really is about the community that you build out there, and how, we really are stronger together as a community.
Could not agree with you more. And, my 10th book will come out in March. So maybe I can do an appearance on your show and say a word or two about my 10th book. It's an interesting one, I think, anyway, because, again, my 10th, but it's my first novel. The previous 9 books are all nonfiction, including my current book, which is out now, which is called Sailing True North, 10 Admirals and the Voyage of Character, which deals with the exact topics that we're talking about and that you illustrate so beautifully in your book, all nonfiction. So I said to myself, ultimately, I really want to write a novel. And the format I chose was to write into the future. So the title of the novel is 2034, like the year 2034. And the subtitle is A Novel of the Next World War. It's about a war between the US and China. And I wrote it, Amy, as a cautionary tale to make the point that if we don't find a way to work constructively with China, we are going to stumble into a war. And we can still avoid that. It's still 15 years in the future. But the idea of the book and the reason to write a novel is to wake people up to the concern that we all ought to have about ensuring we can work in positive ways with China, even as we confront them where we have to on some of their behaviors in the international world. Anyway, it was a wonderful experience to write a novel. It's very different than the nonfiction writing. And maybe I can appear on your show and do a piece on that at some point in March.
No, that is absolutely wonderful. I actually have my first chapter coming out in this month. And it is called Prostitutes and Promises, that chapter. And it's learning authentic leadership in various cultures. And it's based on the biblical character of Rahab and how she had to be trusted, even though she was very, very different. And such an important thing that we have to learn other cultures' values. And then when they're true to their own values, then we learn to respect them for those values. And I think one of the biggest problems we have is we don't communicate well with cultures that are very dissimilar to us, like China.
That's absolutely right. And in order to improve in that regard, one of the things I talk about a lot is that true leaders, people of character, are willing to learn about others. It kind of is part of the civility piece of this, but it's really a different word. It's empathy. And it's the idea that you can learn what it's like to walk in another's shoes, both individually, but perhaps as importantly, what does another nation's culture and history and customs tell us about them? You know, every time I visited a country in U.S. European Command, and there are 51 countries in the area of responsibility, area of focus of U.S. European Command, 51 countries. Every time I visited one, I would try and read a book or even a novel written by somebody from that country to try and understand their culture, their history, their customs in a deeper way than the briefing books could prepare me for. And so I'm a big believer in making the intellectual effort to learn about others, both individually in our own lives, but also nationally. We need to learn much more about China. And I'll close on this point by saying China, and I've always found this with the Chinese, they know us much better than we know them. We need to correct that, again, if we're going to avoid stumbling into a conflict with China.
Sir, so many great points. I'm looking forward to having you back on the show in March, 24 authors in 12 hours. And I really want to just thank you so much for your time. And as a Greek American, I would like to leave you with Efkalisto.
Efkaristo.
Efkalisto.
Yes, very well said. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, Amy. And I look forward to seeing you again in March. Thank you.